The morning mist of May 15th, 1873, hung over the Black Forest valleys like wool caught on thorns, and Wilhelm Krauss was already at work. You see, a man who tends pigeons must rise before his charges, must be waiting when they wake, must know each bird's temperament as surely as a mother knows her children's voices. Wilhelm possessed this knowledge in abundance, accumulated over 26 years of patient observation. His cottage stood 50 meters from the dovecote, close enough to hear any disturbance, far enough to grant the birds their necessary peace. The structure itself, a hexagonal tower of limestone and timber, rose 3 stories above the Baron von Steinberg's estate, its peaked roof crowned with a weather vane that had pointed steadfastly southeast for the past week. Wilhelm noted such things. Wind patterns determined flight paths, and flight paths determined whether messages arrived or vanished into the vast green maze of the Schwarzwald. "Mornin', Brunhild," he murmured to a pearl-gray hen, his thick Saxon accent softening the consonants. She cooed in response, ruffling her feathers as he checked her nesting box. 47 pigeons called this tower home, each with its own name, its own peculiarities. Bruno, the lead cock, strutted along his perch with military precision, a bird who'd carried dispatches during the war with France, now reduced to bearing bank notices and grain prices. The world had changed considerably since the wars ended. The new German Empire buzzed with telegraph wires and railway tracks, yet here in the Black Forest, where valleys could swallow sound and ancient trees remembered pagan offerings, the old ways persisted. Pigeons still flew where telegraph poles couldn't reach, still carried secrets across mountain passes where no train dared venture. Wilhelm understood this intersection of old and new, lived within it daily, though he rarely spoke of such philosophical matters aloud. A footstep on gravel announced company. Young Klaus Müller appeared around the dovecote's corner, his 11-year-old face bright with curiosity despite the early hour. The boy's mother, Anna, served as the Baron's housekeeper, and she permitted these morning visits, provided Klaus didn't neglect his schoolwork. Wilhelm appreciated the company more than he'd ever admit. Since Martha's death 5 years past, the typhoid had taken her in 3 days, barely time to say goodbye. The cottage felt too quiet, the evenings too long. "Herr Krauss, why does Bruno always face east when he sleeps?" Wilhelm's weathered face cracked into a rare smile. "Magnetic sense, young Klaus. These birds carry invisible compasses in their heads, feel the earth's pull like we feel heat from a stove." He opened another nesting box, checking for eggs. "Though Bruno's might be slightly bent from that time he flew through an artillery barrage at Sedan." The boy's eyes widened at this hint of wartime adventure, but Wilhelm had already moved on, his attention caught by something troubling. 3 of his best flyers, Augustus, Minerva, and Leopold, showed signs of stress. Their wing feathers were ruffled unusually, their eyes darting toward the forest line beyond the estate's formal gardens. "Hawks?" Klaus suggested, following Wilhelm's gaze. "Perhaps." Wilhelm frowned, studying the empty sky. Yet something felt wrong about the hawk activity lately. Yesterday, he'd observed a red-tailed hawk veering sharply away from a perfectly viable hunting ground near the forest's edge, as if repelled by an invisible barrier. Natural predators followed patterns, and this broke them all. The bronze bell at the main house chimed 7 times. Wilhelm closed the last nesting box and descended the narrow wooden stairs, Klaus following like a shadow. They emerged to find Baron Friedrich von Steinberg himself approaching, his gold-headed walking stick tapping anxiously against the cobblestones. The Baron, 58 years old and bearing his age in deep lines around his eyes, had lost much of his former vigor when his eldest son fell at Gravelotte. Now he threw himself into modernizing his estate with the fervor of a man outrunning grief. "Kraus, excellent! I need your best birds prepared for a new route." Wilhelm straightened slightly, but kept his natural caution with the powerful. "Of course, Herr Baron. Which direction?" "Stuttgart. The Württemberg Agricultural Bank has agreed to finance our irrigation project, but they insist on daily correspondence. The telegraph lines won't reach us until autumn, so your pigeons must bridge the gap." The Baron's nervous fingers twisted his watch chain. "This is crucial, Kraus. Graf von Reichenbach has his own proposal before them, something about railway expansion. We cannot afford delays or complications." Wilhelm nodded slowly, already calculating distances, wind patterns, and training schedules. Stuttgart lay 70 kilometers northeast, across 2 river valleys and the Swabian Jura's foothills. Not impossible, but challenging enough to require his most experienced birds. "I'll need 2 weeks to establish the route properly, Herr Baron. 3 teams of 4 birds each, rotating daily to prevent exhaustion." "You have 10 days. The Baron's tone brooked no argument. The Graf has already begun his campaign. As the Baron departed, Wilhelm noticed Anna Müller watching from the main house's kitchen window. She raised her hand slightly, a greeting or perhaps a warning. The household staff always knew more than they said, and Anna possessed particularly sharp instincts. Wilhelm made a mental note to speak with her later, then turned back to find Klaus examining a feather on the ground. "Herr Krause, this doesn't look like it's from one of our birds." The feather was indeed unusual. Too long for a pigeon, too dark for the local hawk species, with an odd, artificial sheen. Wilhelm pocketed it carefully, his mind already turning over possibilities. In his experience, when pigeons began acting strangely, humans were invariably the cause. 7 days had passed since the Baron's urgent commission, and Wilhelm's carefully laid plans were unraveling like a spool of thread caught on a nail. The morning of May 22nd brought unseasonable warmth to the Schwarzwald, the kind that made the pine resin weep and filled the air with its sharp perfume. Wilhelm stood in his dovecote, staring at 3 empty perches where his most reliable messengers should have returned hours ago. Augustus, Minerva, and Leopold, birds he'd trained personally, veterans of dozens of flights, had vanished somewhere between Stuttgart and home. The bank's morning correspondence, whatever crucial financial details it contained, was lost with them. Wilhelm's thick fingers drummed against the wooden ledge as he calculated possibilities. Storm fronts? None reported. Hunters? Unlikely on the established flight path. Hawks? 3 seasoned pigeons wouldn't all fall to natural predation. "They know the way," he muttered in his Saxon dialect, more to himself than to the remaining birds cooing softly in their boxes. Trust. That was the foundation of his craft. You trusted the birds to return, and they trusted you to be waiting. This breakdown of trust disturbed him more than he cared to examine. The 4th pigeon of the morning squadron, a younger female named Greta, suddenly appeared on the horizon. Wilhelm's practiced eye caught her immediately, flying too low, weaving slightly, exhausted. She practically collapsed onto the landing platform, her small heart racing against his palm as he gently lifted her. The message capsule on her leg remained sealed, but something was wrong. The wax seal, while intact, showed signs of heating and recooling, tiny bubbles in its surface that shouldn't exist. Inside the main house, Baron von Steinberg paced his study like a caged wolf. Wilhelm had seen that particular stride before, during the war when supply lines failed and orders went astray. The Baron's morning coat was already wrinkled from nervous tugging, his usually immaculate mustache slightly askew from constant touching. 3 birds lost. 3? The Baron's voice pitched higher with each word. Do you understand what this means, Kraus? Wilhelm placed the message capsule on the Baron's desk with deliberate care. The 4th arrived, Herr Baron, though I believe you should examine this seal closely. The Baron snatched up the capsule, then froze. His fingers, trembling slightly from agitation, traced the imperfections in the wax. When he broke it open and unfolded the thin paper within, his face drained of color. This isn't what they sent. The numbers are wrong. The signature different. He collapsed into his leather chair. Someone has read my correspondence. Someone has changed it, Wilhelm finished quietly. The implications hung between them like morning mist, dense and obscuring. In the new Germany, industrial espionage had become as common as pickpockets at market day. Railway concessions, manufacturing patents, agricultural innovations, information was currency. And someone had just robbed the Baron's vault. It's that cursed forest, the Baron said suddenly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The Dunkelwald. My grandfather always said that patch of forest was wrong, built on old foundations, pagan ones. The altar stone is still there, you know, covered in moss but unbroken. The birds fly over it, and the old gods reach up and... Wilhelm had heard such talk before. Every mishap in the district eventually got blamed on the standing stones deep in the Dunkelwald, that section of forest where the trees grew too close and the shadows fell too dark even at midday. Martha had believed such stories, would cross herself when walking past certain groves. But Wilhelm knew that men's greed explained more mysteries than ancient curses ever could. With respect, Herr Baron, I should examine the flight path myself. If something is disturbing the birds— No! The Baron's hand slapped his desk hard enough to rattle the inkwell. You don't understand, Kraus. My family has owned this land for 300 years. We know what lurks in those woods. My own great-uncle disappeared there in 1812, chasing what he thought was a white stag. They found him 3 days later, babbling about eyes in the trees, watchers in the shadows. Wilhelm kept his expression carefully neutral. He'd learned long ago that arguing with employers about their superstitions was like trying to teach a pig to sing. It wasted your time and annoyed the pig. Still, 3 missing pigeons demanded investigation, supernatural or otherwise. A knock interrupted them. Anna Müller entered, carrying the morning's coffee service. Her presence immediately calmed the room, her practical efficiency a counterweight to the Baron's agitation. She set down the tray with practiced silence, but Wilhelm caught her eye as she poured. The slight tilt of her head toward the window told him she had something to share, later, privately. Perhaps, Wilhelm suggested carefully, I could speak with the local shepherds, Herr Baron. They know the forest edges, might have seen something unusual. The Baron waved his consent absently, already fixated on the corrupted message. Do what you must, but don't enter the Dunkelwald itself. I won't have another death on my conscience. Walking back to his dovecote, Wilhelm pondered that last statement. Another death suggested a first one, something beyond old family legends. The morning's heat was building, unusual for May, and the air itself seemed to press down with peculiar weight. Even the remaining pigeons appeared restless, their normal cooing replaced by an anxious burbling. Klaus was waiting by the dovecote, school apparently forgotten. The boy held something in his cupped hands, a pigeon, but not one of Wilhelm's. This bird was younger, its feathers dulled with exhaustion, and along its wing ran 3 parallel scratches, too evenly spaced to be accidental. "I found her by the well," Klaus explained. "She's not from the Graf's estate. I know all their birds. But look at her leg ring." Wilhelm examined the small metal band. The markings were in code, but not one he recognized from any local breeder.
More puzzling were the scratches. They looked almost like marks from a tool, not claws. He made a decision that would have seemed hasty to anyone who didn't understand the patience required in his profession. Sometimes, waiting and watching revealed more than charging forward. "Klaus, can you keep a secret?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Good. We're going to train this bird to fly home, wherever that might be. And when she does, we're going to follow." The map spread across Wilhelm's cottage table looked like a battlefield diagram, which in a sense it was. Red ink marked where Augustus, Minerva, and Leopold had vanished. Blue traced the normal flight paths. Black indicated the Dunkelwald's boundaries. By the evening of May 28th, Wilhelm had added 17 more markers, every anomaly reported by local farmers, every strange pigeon behavior noted in his meticulous logs dating back 6 weeks. A pattern was emerging, though not one that made immediate sense. The disturbances formed a rough crescent along the forest's eastern edge, but only during morning flights when the wind blew from the southwest. Afternoon flights passed unmolested. It suggested something deliberate, calculated, human. Klaus sat across from him, carefully copying the map into his school notebook. The boy had proven surprisingly useful, his young eyes catching details Wilhelm might have missed. Anna had given permission for these evening sessions, perhaps understanding that her son needed purpose as much as Wilhelm needed assistance. "Herr Kraus, why does the pattern avoid this section here?" Klaus pointed to a gap in the disturbances near an old logging road. Wilhelm studied the spot. The boy was right. A corridor of normal flight existed where logic suggested problems should occur. Either something protects that area, or whoever causes this wants it left clear. Remember, Klaus, what's missing often tells us more than what's present. A knock interrupted them. Old Hermann Keller stood in the doorway, shepherd's crook in hand, his weathered face grave beneath his worn felt hat. Wilhelm had sent word hoping to speak with him, but hadn't expected the old man to walk 3 kilometers after dark. "You're asking about the forest birds," Hermann said without preamble. "My sheep won't graze near the eastern meadows anymore. Started 2 months back, right after the spring equinox." Wilhelm poured schnapps for the shepherd, noting how the man's hands shook slightly as he drank. Hermann had tended flocks in these hills for 40 years. Not much frightened him. "It's not natural, what's happening there," Hermann continued. "I've seen hawks turn away mid-dive, seen crows refuse to roost in certain trees. And there's something else." He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. "I've glimpsed shadows that don't match any bird I know. Angular, too still, up in the high branches." The mysterious feather Wilhelm had found suddenly seemed more significant. He retrieved it from his drawer, showing it to Hermann, who examined it with surprising expertise. "That's no living bird. Feel the texture. It's painted fabric, maybe oiled paper.
The shepherd's assessment carried the weight of experience. Someone's playing at scarecrows, but sophisticated ones. After Hermann departed, Wilhelm sat in contemplation while Klaus sketched the feather. The boy's drawing was precise, analytical, revealing an artistic talent that surprised them both. As the evening deepened, Wilhelm made a decision that would have seemed reckless to anyone who valued their position. Tomorrow, he would enter the forest himself. May 30th dawned gray and humid, with the oppressive feeling that precedes summer thunderstorms. Wilhelm left before sunrise, telling Klaus to tend the morning feeding if he hadn't returned by 7. The boy wanted to accompany him, but Wilhelm couldn't risk Anna's wrath or, more importantly, the child's safety.
The forest edge felt like crossing into another country. The temperature dropped 5 degrees within 20 meters, and the bird songs changed from the melodious thrushes of the meadow to the harsh calls of jays and the mechanical drumming of woodpeckers. Wilhelm followed an old hunter's path, barely visible beneath spring growth, his eyes scanning the canopy. 2 hours of searching revealed nothing unusual until he reached a small clearing where an ancient oak spread its branches like a giant's umbrella. The tree must have been 500 years old, its trunk thick enough that 3 men couldn't embrace it. And there, 40 feet up where the main branches diverged, something unnatural caught the morning light. Wilhelm circled the tree slowly, confirming his suspicion. A kite, masterfully crafted to resemble a hawk in flight, hung suspended by nearly invisible wire. From below, especially in morning light, it would appear to be a raptor hovering in place. The craftsmanship was exceptional. Whoever made this understood both aerodynamics and bird anatomy. Interesting morning for a walk. Wilhelm spun to find a man watching him from the path, rough-dressed, carrying a hunting rifle with the casual ease of long familiarity. The stranger's face was partially obscured by beard and hat, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Gottfried Becker," the man said, not offering his hand. "Forester for these parts, though parts is generous considering the Graf von Reichenbach owns most of it now." Wilhelm recognized the name. Becker had worked for a larger estate near Freiburg until some scandal, embezzlement, most said, though nothing was proven. Now he survived on temporary work and local knowledge, a man sliding down society's ladder 1 rung at a time. "Wilhelm Krause. I keep the Baron von Steinberg's pigeons." "I know who you are." Becker's laugh was bitter. "Everyone knows the pigeon master who speaks to birds in Saxon and lost his wife to the fever. We all have our stories here." He pulled a flask from his coat, took a drink, and, surprisingly, offered it to Wilhelm. The schnapps burned, but Wilhelm accepted it as a peace offering. Men who drank together rarely fought, at least not immediately. "You're looking at our forest decoration," Becker said, gesturing at the kite. "There are 6 more like it, different sizes, different heights. Someone spent considerable money on this project." "You know who?" Becker's smile was crooked. "I know many things. I know the Graf has been buying land parcels along the proposed railway route. I know certain messages between estates have gone astray recently. I know a man named Jakob Zimmermann has been hired as the Graf's new gamekeeper despite having no references." He took another drink. "What I don't know is why an honest craftsman like you would risk entering these woods alone." Wilhelm chose his words carefully. "My pigeons are going missing. It's my responsibility to discover why." Responsibility. Becker rolled the word around like wine. Noble concept.
Tell me, Herr Kraus, what's your responsibility worth? Because knowing things in these woods can be unhealthy. The Graf has long arms and a longer memory. Before Wilhelm could respond, a sound made both men freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets approaching along the main path. Becker grabbed Wilhelm's arm, pulling him behind the massive oak. Through the underbrush, they glimpsed 3 men in the Graf's green livery, one carrying what appeared to be a wire ladder. "Maintenance day," Becker whispered. "They check the kites every 3 days, adjust them for wind conditions." The men worked with practiced efficiency, clearly following an established routine.
Wilhelm memorized every detail, every face, every tool they used. These weren't simple servants, but skilled technicians, and their presence here confirmed his darkest suspicions about the missing pigeons. 3 days after the forest encounter, Wilhelm found Gottfried Becker waiting in his cottage doorway at dusk, considerably more drunk than during their first meeting. The forester swayed slightly, clutching a leather satchel as if it contained imperial secrets. June 5th had brought unseasonable cold, and Becker's breath misted in the evening air as he spoke. "You want to understand the game being played? Then you need to understand the players." He pushed past Wilhelm without invitation, settling heavily into the chair by the cold fireplace. Wilhelm lit the fire methodically, giving the man time to gather his thoughts. In his experience, drunk men told truths they'd never voice sober, but pushing too hard would make them stubborn. He poured coffee, strong and black, setting it within Becker's reach. "The Graf von Reichenbach," Becker began, staring into the growing flames, "is not content with his 12,000 hectares. He dreams of iron rails and steam engines, of cargo stations where his forest now stands. The Stuttgart to Basel Railway will pass through this valley, that much is certain. The question is, whose land it crosses, whose pockets it fills." The forester pulled papers from his satchel, spreading them on Wilhelm's simple table. Survey maps, covered in annotations showing proposed railway routes. One line ran through the Baron's best agricultural land. Another curved through the Graf's forest holdings. "Your Baron's irrigation project isn't about crops," Becker continued. "It's about making his land too valuable to seizure by eminent domain. The Graf knows this. Every message between your master and those Stuttgart bankers is worth its weight in gold to him." Wilhelm studied the maps, his mind connecting scattered pieces. "So he intercepts the pigeons, reads the messages, adjusts his own strategies accordingly." "Oh, it's cleverer than that." Becker's laugh was hollow. "He doesn't just read them. Sometimes he changes them. Small alterations, nothing dramatic enough to raise suspicion. A number here, a date there. Your Baron thinks he's negotiating one deal while the banks think he's proposing another." The audacity of it made Wilhelm's chest tighten. He'd seen military intelligence operations during the war, but this level of sophisticated deception in civilian life seemed particularly vile. These were not enemies across a battlefield, but neighbors, fellow Germans in the unified empire. "Jacob Zimmermann runs the operation," Becker added, pouring something from his flask into the coffee. "Former poacher from Bavaria. Caught one too many times." The Graf hired him specifically for this project. He has a gift with traps and wires, understands animals better than he understands people. Wilhelm thought of his missing pigeons. He kills them? Some. Others he keeps in a hidden coop near the old charcoal burner's hut, training them to fly to his location instead of home.
Your birds are smart, Herr Kraus, but they can be reconditioned. The thought of his pigeons, Augustus, Minerva, Leopold, imprisoned and confused, made Wilhelm's hands clench involuntarily. These weren't just birds to him, but partners in a delicate craft, each one representing years of careful breeding and training. "Why tell me this?" Wilhelm asked finally. "The Graf must pay you for your silence." Becker's face darkened. "He pays me nothing. Promises, perhaps. Hints that when the railway comes, there'll be work for those who helped. But I've seen what his promises are worth." He stood unsteadily. "My advice? Train your birds to fly different routes. Make them unpredictable. And whatever you do, don't let the Baron send anything crucial by pigeon until this is resolved." The next morning, Wilhelm implemented new training regimens. He divided his flock into smaller groups, teaching each one alternative paths to Stuttgart. Some flew north around the forest, others south through the river valley. It would take longer, use more birds, but predictability was vulnerability. Klaus proved invaluable in this work, his young mind grasping the mathematical patterns of rotation and timing. Together they created a cipher system, different colored leg bands indicating different routes, changed daily according to a schedule only Wilhelm knew. "It's like a puzzle," Klaus said, arranging the bands in their new configuration. "The Graf might catch some pieces, but he can't see the whole picture." Wilhelm admired the boy's optimism, but knew the reality was grimmer.
That afternoon, while checking his training routes, he discovered something that confirmed his worst fears. Near the southern path, barely visible in a thick pine, hung another kite. The Graf's network was more extensive than even Becker knew. The strange pigeon Klaus had found was healing well, its scratched wing showing new feather growth. Wilhelm had been feeding it separately, observing its behavior. The bird showed signs of excellent training, but seemed confused, constantly orienting itself toward the northeast, then correcting toward the northwest, as if torn between two homes. June 7th brought a violent thunderstorm that rattled the dovecote's windows and sent even brave Bruno cowering in his nesting box. Wilhelm used the weather as cover to explore further, knowing the Graf's men wouldn't maintain their kites in such conditions. The rain had turned the forest paths to mud, but it also revealed tracks, human footprints leading to trees that shouldn't have attracted any attention. In a grove of young beeches, Wilhelm found the most sophisticated setup yet. Not just one kite, but three, arranged at different heights to create a gauntlet that any pigeon would struggle to navigate. Wire lines ran between trees, barely visible even when looking for them, creating an aerial maze that would funnel birds toward a specific spot. There, cunningly concealed beneath cut branches and moss, sat a cage trap. Inside were two pigeons, not his, but bearing the Baron's neighbor estate marks from the south. These birds had been missing for weeks, according to the regional correspondence Wilhelm maintained with other pigeon keepers. They were alive, but thin, their eyes dull with captivity. Wilhelm faced a dilemma that gnawed at him throughout the wet walk home. He could free these birds, but that would alert the Graf's men that someone knew their secret. Or he could leave them, gathering more evidence while innocent creatures suffered. In the end, he compromised, loosening the cage door just enough that the next strong wind might blow it open. An accident, not sabotage. That evening, Anna Mueller brought his supper personally rather than sending the usual kitchen maid. She set down the tray of sausage and sauerkraut, then lingered, clearly wrestling with something. "My brother in Berlin has written,"
she said finally. "He manages a telegraph office there. Says they need reliable people, especially those who understand message systems." Wilhelm understood the subtext. She was warning him that staying might become dangerous, offering him an escape route if needed. But he also heard something else in her voice, a hope that he wouldn't take it. "Berlin's no place for pigeons," he said simply.
Too much smoke, too many wires. She smiled slightly, the first genuine warmth he'd seen from her since Martha's death. "No, I suppose it isn't." The morning of June 14th arrived, shrouded in mist so thick that Wilhelm could barely see his dovecote from the cottage window. Perfect conditions, he thought, for what needed to be done. The Baron had departed yesterday for Baden-Baden, taking most of the household staff for the summer season's opening. Only essential workers remained, Anna managing the skeleton crew, the groundskeeper, and Wilhelm himself. This absence provided the opportunity Wilhelm had been waiting for. He'd spent the past week memorizing the Graf's maintenance schedule, noting that the kite operators avoided Sundays and Wednesdays. Today was Wednesday, and the fog would provide additional cover for his deepest penetration yet into the Dunkelwald. He entered the forest at a different point, following a dried creek bed that Becker had marked on his map. The fog transformed the woods into something primordial. Trees materialized from gray nothing like ancient sentinels, and every sound seemed both muffled and amplified. Wilhelm carried a haversack with wire cutters, a small mirror for signaling, and, most importantly, a notebook wrapped in oilcloth. 2 hours of careful navigation brought him to what Becker had called the heart of the operation. Here, 3 game trails converged in a natural clearing dominated by a massive granite boulder, the pagan altar stone the Baron feared. Moss covered its surface, but Wilhelm could still make out carved symbols worn smooth by centuries. More interesting were the fresh marks in the surrounding soil, wagon wheels, heavy ones, and multiple boot prints. The fog began lifting as morning progressed, revealing the full scope of the Graf's ingenious trap. 7 kites hung at various heights, some shaped like hawks, others resembling eagles. But these were more sophisticated than the earlier ones. They had articulated wings that moved slightly in the breeze, creating an uncanny simulation of hovering predators. The engineering was remarkable, probably from Munich or even Berlin. Wilhelm sketched everything in his notebook, noting angles, heights, and mechanisms. His pigeons' trained minds would interpret these false predators as a killing field, forcing them to fly lower, slower, directly into the capture zones. The cruelty of using the bird's own survival instincts against them struck him as particularly perverse. A sound made him freeze, footsteps on wet leaves, approaching from the north trail. Wilhelm quickly concealed himself behind the altar stone, pressing against its cold surface. Through the remaining wisps of fog emerged not the Graf's men, but Klaus, looking simultaneously terrified and determined. "I followed you," the boy whispered unnecessarily. "Mother thinks I'm at school, but I had to come." The strange pigeon, she escaped this morning, flew northeast. I thought you should know. Wilhelm felt equal parts anger and admiration. The boy had more courage than sense, but his information was valuable. That pigeon's destination might reveal another piece of the puzzle. Before he could respond, more footsteps echoed through the clearing, multiple sets, moving with purpose. He pulled Klaus down behind the stone just as 5 men entered the clearing. Jacob Zimmermann led them, his lean face focused and alert.
Wilhelm recognized him from Becker's description: wolfish features, prematurely gray hair, the careful movements of someone who'd spent years avoiding gamekeepers before becoming one. "Check every wire," Zimmerman ordered in accented High German, Bavarian origins clear. "The storm last week might have loosened something."
"And bring down number 4. We're replacing it with the new model from Stuttgart." The men worked with military precision, using rope ladders and pulleys with practiced ease. Wilhelm held Klaus close, feeling the boy's rapid heartbeat. One man passed within 3 meters of their hiding spot, but the altar stone's bulk and the surrounding ferns provided adequate concealment. "Herr Zimmermann," one worker called out, "we've got 14 birds in the holding coop. Should we transfer them?" "Tomorrow. The Graf wants to examine them personally first. Some carry interesting information about the Baron's irrigation suppliers." Wilhelm memorized every word, every detail. 14 birds. That meant more than just his pigeons were being taken. The Graf was intercepting messages from multiple estates, building a comprehensive picture of the region's economic activities. The maintenance took an hour. During that time, Wilhelm noticed something crucial. Zimmerman kept checking a particular tree, one that looked unremarkable except for a small metal box hidden in a hollow. After the men departed, Wilhelm waited another 30 minutes before investigating. The box contained a logbook wrapped in waterproof fabric. Each entry detailed captured pigeons, messages intercepted, alterations made. The scope was staggering. Over the past 2 months, the Graf had intercepted nearly 100 messages, subtly manipulating the economic landscape of the entire district. "This is evidence," Klaus whispered, understanding immediately. Wilhelm photographed several pages with a small camera he'd borrowed from the Baron's study, a modern marvel that Martha would have called witchcraft. The irony of using the Baron's own technology to document crimes against him wasn't lost on Wilhelm. Returning the logbook exactly as found, they began their careful retreat. But as they reached the forest edge, a figure stepped from behind an oak. Anna Müller, her face pale with fury and fear. "Klaus Müller, you will explain yourself this instant," the boy stammered, but Wilhelm intervened. "It's my fault, Frau Müller. I needed an extra pair of eyes, and Klaus volunteered." Anna's expression softened slightly as she looked at Wilhelm. "You found something. Something important." He nodded, and she made a decision that surprised him. "Then we need to protect it. Come, both of you. We'll say Klaus was ill, that you were helping me bring him home. No one will question it." Walking between them, Klaus began describing what they'd seen with the enthusiasm of youth discovering adult secrets. But Anna's eyes met Wilhelm's over the boy's head, and he saw understanding there. She knew the danger they were now in, knew that knowledge could be as fatal as ignorance was foolish. That evening, Wilhelm developed the photographs in his cottage's cellar, using chemicals he'd learned to mix during his military service. The images were clear enough: dates, times, message contents, all in Zimmerman's careful hand. But possessing evidence and using it safely were vastly different challenges. A soft knock interrupted his work. Anna stood at his door with a pot of coffee and fresh bread, Klaus already sent to bed. "The Baron returns in 3 days," she said quietly. "Whatever you plan to do, it must be soon." Wilhelm showed her the photographs. She studied them with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read ledgers and legal documents despite her station, skills acquired from necessity after her husband's death. "This is enough to destroy the Graf," she said, "but also enough to make him desperate.
Desperate men do terrible things. June 23rd brought Wilhelm a revelation that changed everything. He sat in the Baron's study, having been summoned urgently upon his employer's return from Baden-Baden. Spread across the mahogany desk were 17 letters, correspondence between the Baron and various banks, suppliers, and railway officials. Each had been sent by pigeon over the past 2 months. Each showed subtle signs of tampering. "My own secretary discovered it," the Baron said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "She was reconciling accounts and noticed discrepancies. Numbers that didn't match, terms we never agreed to, promises I never made." Wilhelm examined the letters with growing understanding. The alterations were masterful. A 7 changed to a 9, extending a delivery date by 2 days. A decimal point shifted, multiplying a price by 10. Small changes that accumulated into massive disadvantage. The Graf hadn't just been reading messages, he'd been rewriting the Baron's entire business narrative.
"Look at this one," the Baron continued, pointing to a letter dated June 1st. "I offered 8,000 marks for timber rights. By the time it reached Stuttgart, the offer had become 18,000. The sellers accepted immediately, of course. I'm now bound to a contract I never made." The sophistication required for such forgery impressed, even as it appalled. Zimmermann must have a skilled forger in his employ, someone who could match handwriting and ink perfectly. Wilhelm thought of the 14 pigeons in the holding coop, each one potentially carrying another piece of fraudulent correspondence. "Herr Baron, I have evidence of how this is being done." Wilhelm presented his photographs, watching the Baron's face cycle through disbelief, understanding, and finally, a cold fury that reminded Wilhelm why this man's family had held these lands for 3 centuries. The Baron studied each image meticulously, his fingers drumming against the desk in a rhythm that suggested military marches. "Graf von Reichenbach," he said finally, the name dropping like a stone into still water. "My neighbor, my fellow member of the district council, the man who stood beside me at my son's funeral." The personal betrayal cut deeper than the financial damage Wilhelm could see. These men moved in the same social circles, attended the same churches, married into the same families. This wasn't just crime. It was a breach of the unwritten codes that held their class together. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, Wilhelm spotted Klaus running across the courtyard, clutching something in his hands. The boy burst through the study door without knocking, chest heaving, eyes bright with excitement and fear. "Herr Kraus, the strange pigeon, she came back!" "But look what she's carrying." The bird Klaus held was indeed the mysterious pigeon from weeks ago, but now she bore a message capsule on her leg. More intriguingly, she showed signs of recent captivity. Her tail feathers were clipped in a particular pattern Wilhelm recognized as a breeder's mark, and there was fresh ink on her leg band. The message inside was encoded, but not in any cipher Wilhelm knew. The Baron, however, recognized it immediately. "This is Graf von Reichenbach's private code. He uses it for his most sensitive correspondence." The Baron's eyes narrowed. How did this bird come to carry it? Wilhelm studied the pigeon more carefully. The parallel scratches on her wing had healed, but the pattern suddenly made sense. "She's a double agent, Herr Baron, trained to fly between 2 locations, carrying messages back and forth. But something went wrong with her conditioning. Perhaps the scratches disrupted her training." "She's been flying confused patterns, unable to choose between her 2 destinations." "Can you decode this?" Wilhelm asked. The Baron nodded slowly.
He'd apparently made a study of his rival's communications long before this current crisis. As he worked through the cipher, his face grew increasingly grim. Its instructions to Zimmerman. The Graf plans to intercept tomorrow's banking consortium response, the final approval for my irrigation project. He intends to replace it entirely with a forgery, rejecting my proposal and suggesting the land would be better used for railway development. The audacity was breathtaking. Not just manipulation now, but complete fabrication. The Graf was rewriting reality itself, creating a paper trail that would justify seizing the Baron's land through legal means. "We need to stop him," Klaus said with the moral clarity of youth. "It's not that simple," the Baron replied, but Wilhelm heard uncertainty in his voice.
Social equals didn't accuse each other of crimes without irrefutable proof, and even then, the scandal would damage both parties. Wilhelm had been thinking, though, his craftsman's mind working through the problem like he'd approach training a difficult bird. "Herr Baron, what if we don't stop him? What if we let him intercept exactly what he expects, but ensure others witness it?" The Baron leaned forward, interested. "Explain." "Tomorrow, you send your usual morning correspondence by pigeon. But we use marked birds, ones that will be easily identifiable. We alert the regional postal inspector, perhaps the district magistrate, that you're testing a new route for security purposes and would appreciate official observation. When the Graf's men intercept the birds, they'll be caught in the act," the Baron finished, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Not by me, but by imperial officials. The scandal would be entirely his." They spent the rest of the afternoon refining the plan. Anna proved invaluable, her knowledge of the household routines allowing them to coordinate without arousing suspicion. She suggested involving the postal inspector from Freiburg, Wilhelm Setz, known for his incorruptible nature and thorough investigations. That evening, Wilhelm prepared his special pigeons. He selected 6 of his finest, including Bruno, whose military service gave him particular steadiness. Each bird received a tiny mark on their leg band, invisible from distance but unmistakable up close. The real messages they would carry were innocuous: grain prices and weather observations. But he also prepared duplicate birds with identical-looking but false message capsules, containing the kind of sensitive financial information the Graf expected. Klaus helped with the preparations, his nimble fingers perfect for the delicate work. "Herr Kraus," he asked quietly, "what if something goes wrong? What if the Graf discovers our plan?" Wilhelm considered the boy deserved honesty. "Then we'll learn whether justice exists outside of fairy tales. But sometimes, Klaus, you must trust that doing right matters, even when it's dangerous." As night fell, Wilhelm made one final preparation. He visited the strange pigeon, now recovered and alert. On tiny paper, he wrote a simple message in clear German. "The forest has eyes. The sky has witnesses. Truth flies on honest wings." He attached it to the pigeon and released her, watching her circle once before heading northeast toward an unknown destination. Perhaps whoever trained her would understand the warning. Perhaps not. But Wilhelm had learned that in the delicate balance between predator and prey, sometimes the smallest weight could tip the scales. Dawn on July 2nd crept across the Schwarzwald with unusual stillness, as if the forest itself held its breath.
Wilhelm released the marked pigeons at precisely 6 o'clock, watching them spiral upward into the growing light.
Bruno led the formation, his military precision evident even after years of civilian service. The postal inspector from Freiburg, Herr Setz, stood beside Wilhelm, pocket watch in hand, documenting every detail in his official ledger. "They fly beautifully," Setz observed, a thin man whose careful movements suggested a lifetime of precise work. "How long before they reach the interception zone?" 20 minutes, perhaps 25 if they catch the thermals rising from the valley. Wilhelm had stationed himself at a hunter's blind overlooking the eastern approach to the Dunkelwald, a position that offered clear sight lines while remaining concealed. Klaus waited with the backup pigeons near the dovecote, ready to release them on signal. Anna managed the main house, ensuring the Baron maintained his normal routine to avoid suspicion. Through his field glasses, borrowed from the Baron's collection, Wilhelm tracked his bird's flight. They followed the predicted path perfectly, Bruno making minute adjustments for wind shifts that only an experienced bird would notice. Then, as they approached the forest edge, Wilhelm saw them, the kites rising like phantoms from the canopy. "There," he whispered to Setz, passing him the glasses. The postal inspector studied the scene carefully. "Ingenious, and completely illegal under imperial postal regulations. Interfering with message delivery carries a 5-year sentence." The pigeons reacted as expected, veering away from the false predators, descending toward the safer-seeming lower routes. Wilhelm knew exactly where they would go. He'd studied the graph's trap pattern for weeks. Sure enough, the formation broke apart, individual birds scattering in controlled panic. Movement below caught Wilhelm's attention. Jakob Zimmermann emerged from concealment near a massive pine, carrying a net on a long pole. His movements were fluid, practiced, those of a natural hunter. 2 other men flanked him, herding the confused pigeons toward a specific grove where Wilhelm knew cage traps waited. Bruno fought valiantly, diving and wheeling, his war experience showing. But even he couldn't navigate the maze of wires and false predators indefinitely. Zimmermann himself caught Bruno, his hands surprisingly gentle as he removed the message capsule. "Document everything," Wilhelm told Setz, who was already writing furiously. What happened next surprised even Wilhelm. Zimmermann didn't simply pocket the messages. He produced a portable writing desk from a hidden cache, complete with inks, papers, and what appeared to be examples of handwriting. Working with remarkable speed, he opened each capsule, read its contents, and began creating forgeries on the spot. The skill was mesmerizing. Zimmermann's hand moved with an artist's precision, matching letter forms perfectly. Within 15 minutes, he'd created 6 new messages, sealed them in identical capsules, and was attaching them to different pigeons, birds from his hidden coop, trained to fly to alternate destinations. "He's not just intercepting," Setz breathed. "He's running a complete shadow postal system." Wilhelm felt a grudging respect for the operation's sophistication, even as fury burned in his chest at seeing Bruno roughly caged with the others. These weren't just birds to him, but partners, and their betrayal felt personal in a way that surprised him with its intensity. A whistle echoed through the forest. 3 short bursts, a warning signal. Zimmermann's head snapped up, scanning the surrounding area. Someone had spotted something wrong. Wilhelm and Setz pressed themselves lower in the blind, barely breathing. Through the trees came another figure, Graf von Reichenbach himself, mounted on a black hunter,
riding with the easy confidence of old nobility.
He dismounted near Zimmerman, who showed him the intercepted messages with obvious pride. "Excellent work," the Graf's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "The Baron's irrigation project will die today. By next month, I'll own that entire valley." "There's something odd about one of the birds," Zimmerman mentioned, holding up Bruno. "It has an unusual mark on its band." The Graf examined Bruno closely, then froze. His face, previously triumphant, shifted to suspicion, then alarm. "This is deliberate. Someone knows. Someone." He never finished the sentence. Setz stood up in the blind, producing his official badge and a police whistle. Its sharp blast cut through the forest like a blade. Within moments, uniformed officers emerged from hidden positions, the full weight of imperial authority descending on the scene. "Graf von Reichenbach, by the authority of the Imperial Postal Service, you are under arrest for interference with official communications." The Graf's face cycled through emotions: shock, rage, and finally a cold calculation. "You have no proof? These are wild birds, nothing more." Setz smiled thinly. "The marked bands prove otherwise, as does the complete forgery kit your man carries. And, of course, we have witnesses to your confession just now." Zimmerman tried to run, his poacher's instincts triggering. But Wilhelm had anticipated this. He'd suggested positioning officers along the old escape routes Becker had marked on his map. Zimmerman made it less than 50 meters before being tackled by a particularly enthusiastic young policeman. The roundup took 2 hours. Officers discovered the hidden coop with 43 captive pigeons from various estates, hundreds of intercepted messages, and enough forged documents to rewrite the entire region's economic structure. The Graf maintained his aristocratic composure throughout, but Wilhelm saw the moment he truly understood his position. When they found the logbook documenting every crime, the same one Wilhelm had photographed weeks earlier. As the police wagons departed with their prisoners, Wilhelm entered the hidden coop to free the captive birds. Most were confused, malnourished, their natural homing instincts disrupted by weeks of contradictory training. But there, in a separate cage marked with a red tag, Wilhelm found Augustus, Minerva, and Leopold, his original missing 3. They recognized him immediately, cooing and fluttering against the bars. His hands shook slightly as he opened their cage, checking each bird for injuries. They were thin but unharmed, their eyes still bright with intelligence. "Hello, old friends," he murmured in Saxon. "Time to go home." Bruno, freed from Zimmerman's rough hands, landed on Wilhelm's shoulder with obvious relief. The old warrior bird pecked gently at Wilhelm's ear, a gesture of affection that made the pigeon keeper's eyes unexpectedly moist. The Baron's study had never felt smaller than on the morning of July 10th, when Wilhelm stood before his employer with the full evidence of the Graf's crimes spread across the desk. Outside, summer rain drummed against the windows with unusual violence, as if the weather itself reflected the tension within. The Baron had aged visibly in the past week, the strain of discovering his neighbor's betrayal etching new lines around his eyes. 43 pigeons recovered, Wilhelm reported, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. 17 estates affected. The postal inspector estimates over 300,000 marks in manipulated transactions. The Baron picked up one of the recovered letters, his own handwriting staring back at him, except he'd never written these words. The forgery was so perfect that even he might have believed it genuine without context.
The Graf was more than a thief. He was rewriting our entire society, one message at a time. A knock entered them. Anna entered with coffee, but also with news that made Wilhelm's stomach tighten.
Herr Baron, Graf von Reichenbach's advocate has arrived. He insists on speaking with you immediately.
The advocate, Herr Dr. Weiss from Stuttgart, was everything a noble's legal representative should be: immaculate, articulate, and utterly without conscience. He settled into the offered chair as if he owned it, his pale eyes scanning the room like a predator seeking weakness.
"My client wishes to propose a resolution," Weiss began without preamble, "one that avoids the unpleasantness of a public trial." The Baron's laugh was bitter. "Your client committed crimes against the empire itself. This isn't a matter for private negotiation." "Isn't it?" Weiss produced a leather portfolio.
Consider the consequences of a trial. Every intercepted message will be examined, every altered transaction scrutinized. Your own business dealings, Herr Baron, will be dissected in public. Even innocent arrangements might appear suspicious under such examination. Wilhelm recognized the threat immediately. Even victims could be tainted by association with scandal. The Baron's reputation, carefully built over generations, could crumble regardless of his innocence. It was masterfully calculated emotional blackmail. Furthermore, Weiss continued, my client has information about other activities in this district. The illegal whiskey still operated by your Forrester Becker. The false references provided for your housekeeping staff. Small crimes, perhaps, but crimes nonetheless. Anna stiffened at this last comment. Her husband's military records had been destroyed in a fire. The Baron had accepted her word about his service. Technically, this could be construed as fraud, though only the cruelest interpretation would make it so. Wilhelm felt anger building in his chest, the slow burning kind that had sustained him through military campaigns and personal loss. These men played with others' lives like pieces on a chessboard, caring nothing for the individual suffering they caused. But before he could speak, young Klaus burst through the door.
"Mother, Herr Kraus! Come quickly! The pigeons! They're doing something strange!"
Outside, the dovecote was in chaos. Every bird, all 47, had emerged despite the rain and were circling the tower in a massive spiral, their wings beating in unusual synchronization. Wilhelm had never seen such behavior in 26 years of working with pigeons. Then he noticed the center of their formation, the strange pigeon, the one Klaus had found weeks ago, flying at the spiral's heart.
"She's calling them," Klaus said with wonder.
Listen. Indeed, the bird was producing a unique sound, a low thrumming that the other pigeons seemed to be answering. As Wilhelm watched, the formation suddenly broke, the birds scattering in all directions, not randomly, but with purpose, each heading toward a different point on the horizon.
"They're carrying something,"
Anna noticed, her sharp eyes catching details Wilhelm had missed. Each pigeon bore a tiny capsule, but not the official message carriers. These were smaller, lighter, the kind used for racing competitions. Wilhelm hadn't attached them, which meant understanding struck him like lightning. "Klaus, did you?" The boy nodded, his young face serious beyond its years.
"I wrote down everything. Every crime, every forged letter, every stolen message. 47 copies, going to 47 different places. Newspapers, magistrates, even the Bishop of Freiburg."
Weiss had followed them outside, his composed facade cracking as he realized what was happening. "You can't. This is illegal. Private correspondence cannot be.
"These are my pigeons," Wilhelm said quietly, "carrying my observations of crimes I witnessed. Nothing illegal about that, Herr Doctor." The advocate's face flushed red, then white. He knew exactly what this meant. Within hours, the Graf's crimes would be public knowledge across the entire district. No private arrangement could contain such widespread disclosure. The Baron stood in the rain, watching the disappearing birds with something approaching awe. "You've destroyed him more thoroughly than any trial could have. Social exile is worse than prison for such as the Graf." Wilhelm felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. "I simply did what pigeons do, Herr Baron. I carried messages to their destination. The truth needed to fly." That evening, as the rain finally ceased, Wilhelm found himself in his cottage with unexpected company.
Anna had brought supper. Klaus was sketching the day's events, and even Becker had appeared, considerably more sober than usual. The forester had brought news. Graf von Reichenbach had fled to Switzerland, abandoning his estate and his trial. Zimmermann confessed everything, Becker reported, named 3 accomplices, all arrested. The postal inspector says it's the largest message fraud in the Empire's history. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the pigeons settling for the night. Wilhelm thought about trust, how easily it was broken, how carefully it must be rebuilt. His birds would need time to recover from their ordeal, to relearn their roots without fear of false predators. But they would recover. Trust, once genuine, had deep roots. "Herr Kraus," Klaus asked suddenly, "what happened to the strange pigeon? She disappeared after the others scattered." Wilhelm smiled slightly. "She went home, I think, wherever that might be." Some birds aren't meant to be kept. They serve their purpose and move on. Anna met his eyes across the table, and he saw understanding there. Sometimes the greatest kindness was knowing when to let go. The Graf had never learned that lesson, trying to cage and control what should fly free. It had been his downfall, as it was for all who confused possession with mastery. July 18th dawned crystal clear, the kind of morning that made the Black Forest seem like a cathedral of green light and shadow. Wilhelm stood in his dovecoat, preparing for what he privately thought of as the final act of this strange drama. The Baron had received word that the Regional Administrative Council would convene in 2 days to formally address the Graf's crimes and their aftermath. Every affected estate owner would attend, and Wilhelm had been asked to present his evidence personally. But first, there was a more delicate matter to resolve. Bruno perched on Wilhelm's shoulder as he attached a special message capsule to the bird's leg. Not the usual aluminum tube, but a small silver one, engraved with the imperial postal seal. Inside was a document that Postal Inspector Setz had prepared, officially commending the pigeons of the Steinberg estate for their service in uncovering the fraud. It was perhaps the first time in the Empire's history that birds would receive formal recognition. "You've earned this, old friend," Wilhelm murmured to Bruno, who preened with what looked suspiciously like pride. Klaus had arrived early, as had become his habit. The boy was documenting everything in a leather journal the Baron had given him, his sketches and observations forming a remarkable record of recent events. This morning he was particularly excited about something else entirely. "Herr Kraus, I've been thinking about the aerodynamics of those fake hawks. What if we used similar principles but for good purposes?" Kites that could carry messages when pigeons can't fly, during storms or at night? Wilhelm smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. Youth could find opportunity in any crisis.
Write down your ideas. The Baron mentioned establishing a formal messenger service for the district. Innovation might be welcome. The morning's work was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Jakob Zimmermann stood at the Dovecote entrance, flanked by 2 police guards. The former gamekeeper was much diminished. His wolfish confidence replaced by hollow defeat. The authorities had brought him to identify certain documents, but he'd requested this detour. 5 minutes, one guard said. No more. Zimmermann approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the pigeons. I wanted to apologize. Not to you, I hardly know you, but to them. He gestured at the birds. I've handled many animals in my life, but never with such deliberate cruelty, using their instincts against them.
It was unconscionable. Wilhelm studied the man, seeing genuine remorse beneath the surface. You're a skilled trainer. That much was obvious from your work. My grandfather kept pigeons in Bavaria, Zimmermann said quietly. Taught me to respect them, to understand their intelligence. I betrayed that teaching for money. He paused, then added, the strange pigeon, the one with parallel scratches, she was mine. Raised her from an egg. When she disappeared, I knew something was wrong with what we were doing, but I ignored my conscience. Before Wilhelm could respond, the guards indicated time was up. As Zimmermann was led away, he turned back once more. Her name is Sophia. If she returns, treat her kindly. The afternoon brought a flurry of activity. The Baron had decided to host a gathering for all affected estate owners before the official council meeting. Anna supervised preparations with her typical efficiency, transforming the main house into a center of diplomatic activity. Wilhelm found himself pressed into service as an expert witness, explaining the technical aspects of the interception scheme to various landowners. One conversation proved particularly significant. Freiherr von Hohenberg, whose estate bordered the Grafs to the east, pulled Wilhelm aside privately. I owe you a debt, the older nobleman said. The Graf's manipulations nearly cost me a timber contract worth my entire year's income. But more than that, you've shown that honor exists outside our class. That's a lesson some of us needed to learn. As evening approached, Wilhelm implemented his final stratagem. He'd trained 12 pigeons, including Augustus, Minerva, and Leopold, to perform a synchronized flight pattern, something usually seen only in racing exhibitions. Each bird carried an identical message, the same text that would be read at tomorrow's council meeting, a full accounting of the Graf's crimes, signed by 12 witnesses. The birds launched at sunset, their formation perfect against the golden sky. They circled the estate 3 times, building altitude, then split into 12 different directions, each heading to a different authority. The symbolism wasn't lost on the assembled nobles. Truth, once released, couldn't be recalled or contained. Anna found Wilhelm afterward, as he cleaned the dovecote for tomorrow's rest day. She carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Klaus wanted you to have this, she said, unwrapping a detailed drawing. It showed Wilhelm surrounded by his pigeons, but the boy had captured something deeper. The trust between man and birds, the patience in Wilhelm's posture, the attention in the pigeons' attitudes. He has talent, Wilhelm observed. He has a good teacher, Anna replied. Not just in pigeon keeping, in integrity. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then Anna spoke again, more quietly. My brother wrote again from Berlin.
He's withdrawn his offer. Says he realized I've found something here worth staying for.
Wilhelm felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. The estate needs experienced management, he said carefully. Yes, Anna agreed. It does. She touched his hand briefly, a gesture that said more than words could. The Baron spoke to me today. He's establishing a formal postal service for the district, using pigeons until the telegraph arrives. He wants you to direct it, with Klaus as your official apprentice. The offer was more than Wilhelm had dared hope for. Not just employment, but purpose, continuation, a future that honored both innovation and tradition. His pigeons would become part of the Empire's official infrastructure, bridging the gap between old and new. That night, as Wilhelm made his final rounds, he found Sophia, Zimmerman's lost pigeon, perched on the dovecote's peak. She'd returned, as he'd somehow known she would.
In her beak was a small sprig of pine, an offering, or perhaps an apology. Wilhelm extended his hand, and she hopped onto it, her small weight barely noticeable. "Welcome home," he said simply. The September air carried that particular quality of early autumn in the Black Forest. Crystalline mornings that promised warm afternoons. The smell of ripening apples mixing with pine resin, and everywhere the sense of approaching change. Wilhelm stood atop his dovecote on the 15th of September, watching the seasonal migration of wild birds passing overhead. 2 months had elapsed since the Graf's flight to Switzerland, and the valley had settled into a new rhythm. Below him, the estate bustled with unfamiliar energy. The Baron's irrigation project, finally approved and funded properly, had brought engineers and workers from Stuttgart. Where once silent fields had stretched, now channels were being carved with geometric precision, the landscape itself being rewritten in water and stone. Progress, Wilhelm supposed, though he wondered what his pigeons made of the changing topology they navigated daily. Klaus emerged from the dovecote's interior, carrying a ledger thick with entries. As official apprentice to the district's new postal pigeon service, the boy had thrown himself into the work with dedication that reminded Wilhelm of his own youth. They now managed not just the Baron's 47 birds, but an additional 30 from neighboring estates, creating a network that spanned the entire valley. "The morning flights all returned successfully," Klaus reported. "Even the new route to Offenburg, though Minerva seemed to struggle with the headwind." Wilhelm nodded, noting the detail mentally. Minerva was aging, her 6th year making her unreliable for longer flights. Soon he would need to retire her to breeding, passing her knowledge to a new generation. The thought carried a melancholy that surprised him. When had he begun measuring time in the lifespans of birds? A carriage approaching the estate drew their attention. Wilhelm recognized the passenger immediately. Postal Inspector Setz, returning for his monthly evaluation of their operation. But there was someone else with him, a woman in traveling clothes whose bearing suggested official business despite her modest dress. They descended to meet the visitors, finding the Baron already in conversation with Setz in the courtyard. The woman was introduced as Fräulein Margarete Vogt from the Imperial Ministry of Communications in Berlin, sent to study their innovative integration of traditional and modern message systems. "Your work here has attracted attention at the highest levels," she explained, her Prussian accent marking her as an outsider in this southern valley. "The ministry believes Pigeon Post might serve areas where telegraph lines remain impractical, mountain regions, temporary military installations, disaster zones." Wilhelm found himself appointed as the Fräulein's guide, showing her through their operations with Klaus providing enthusiastic commentary.
She proved surprisingly knowledgeable, asking about flight patterns, weather dependencies, and training methods with the precision of someone who'd done considerable research. In the breeding room, she paused before Sophia's nesting box. Zimmerman's former pigeon had adapted well to her new home, even accepting Bruno as a mate, an unusual pairing given their different backgrounds. But somehow it worked. Nature, Wilhelm reflected, cared little for the distinctions humans drew. "This bird has an unusual history," Fräulein Vogt observed, noting something in her journal. Wilhelm told her Sophia's story, leaving nothing out. The official listened without judgment, her expression thoughtful.
"Redemption through service," she murmured. "The Germans love such narratives. It would make an excellent addition to my report." That afternoon, while the Fraulein conducted her formal interviews, Wilhelm found himself in an unexpected gathering. Anna had organized what she called a small celebration for the successful harvest, but it had evolved into something larger. The estate's workers, several neighboring landowners, even Gottfried Becker, considerably more sober these days, had assembled in the garden. The Baron gave a speech about community and progress, about trust rebuilt and futures secured. But Wilhelm barely heard it, his attention caught by something far more interesting. High above, his pigeons were performing their synchronized flight pattern, not because he'd commanded it, but spontaneously, as if celebrating in their own fashion. Augustus led them, his age showing in his slightly labored wing beats, but his spirit undimmed. "They know," Klaus said quietly beside him. "They know things are better now." Wilhelm wasn't one for attributing human emotions to animals, but he couldn't deny the truth in the boy's words. The pigeons flew differently now, more freely, without the tentative caution that had marked their movements during the Graf's persecution. Trust, once broken and rebuilt, was often stronger than before. As the sun began its descent toward the forest line, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Anna approached with 2 cups of the local apple wine. She'd changed from her working clothes into something finer, a green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. They stood together watching the celebration, comfortable in shared silence. "The Fräulein offered Klaus a scholarship," Anna said eventually, "to study at the Polytechnic School in Stuttgart. Engineering and animal husbandry both." Wilhelm felt a pang of impending loss, but pushed it aside. He should go.
The boy has gifts that need proper cultivation.
He won't leave until next spring. Says he needs to help establish the winter roots first. Anna smiled softly. He's learned duty from you, along with everything else. The evening deepened, and guests began departing. Wilhelm made his final rounds of the dovecote, checking each bird, ensuring fresh water and feed for the night. Bruno and Sophia nested together, their eggs due to hatch within the week. Augustus slept on his favorite perch, head tucked beneath his wing. Leopold and Minerva huddled close, old partners who'd survived the strangest adventure of their lives. As he prepared to close the dovecote, a flutter of wings announced one last arrival. A pigeon he didn't recognize landed on the message platform, young, strong, carrying the marks of a long journey. The capsule on its leg bore the seal of the Imperial Ministry. Inside, in precise official script, was a commission.
The Empire wished to establish a training center for postal pigeons, using the methods developed in the Schwarzwald. Wilhelm was offered the position of director, with authority to recruit assistants and establish protocols that would be used across all German states. He stood in the gathering darkness, holding tomorrow in his hands, while surrounded by the soft sounds of roosting birds. Martha would have laughed at the irony. Her quiet husband,
who preferred birds to most people, being asked to teach an empire. But she also would have understood that this was recognition not of him, but of the craft itself, the ancient art of trust between human and bird, given new purpose in a modernizing world. Later, seated in his cottage with the commission before him, Wilhelm picked up his pen to draft a response. Through the window, he could see the lights of the main house where Anna was putting Klaus to bed, maintaining routines that anchored life in simple necessities.
Beyond, the forest stood eternal and mysterious, keeping its secrets while the world changed around it. He began to write, his thick fingers moving carefully across the page. He would accept, of course, but with conditions. The center must be here, in the valley where the work had begun. Klaus must be guaranteed his apprenticeship regardless of other schooling. And the pigeons, always the pigeons, must be treated as partners, not tools. As his pen scratched across paper, a soft cooing from the dovecote reminded him of the deeper truth he'd learned through these strange months. Messages mattered less than the trust required to carry them. In a world of telegraphs and railways, of progress that threatened to outpace wisdom, perhaps the old ways still had lessons to teach. A pigeon, after all, always knew the way home, not through wires or tracks, but through some inner compass that no amount of human cleverness could replicate or replace. The moon rose full over the Schwarzwald, painting the valley in silver light, and Wilhelm Krauss, master of pigeons, keeper of trust, continued writing his letter accepting a future he'd never imagined, carried forward on wings he'd always understood.